Hello and welcome to this session on how to write a personal-centered positive behaviour support plan with the restraint reduction strategy. So just before we start on the support plan, which you can see has been issued by Security Care, we want to look at the introduction to this. So first of all, writing a positive behaviour support plan and restraint strategy involves a comprehensive and individualised approach to address challenging behaviour or behaviour that could be hazardous, whilst prioritising the well-being of the individual to maintain their dignity as well. There are key steps in this process, including gathering information about the individual's preferences, strengths, triggers, and what's more important, any trauma history, and incorporating the trauma-informed care principles throughout the plan. The plan should also consider the individual's communication style, cultural needs, and social needs, including any dislikes that can contribute to distress. Understanding the behaviours through functional analysis, so for example, ABC charts or incident reportings, can help identify specific triggers. So that could be for behaviours or triggers that include slow triggers, so things that happen over time, or fast triggers, things that happen instantly. Which allows for the development of a proactive and a reactive strategy to help prevent escalation. So we need to be looking at mitigating risks while promoting alternatives for a more acceptable behaviour. And you'll have heard things like positive behaviour support plans or PBS strategies. So in the event of an escalation, we need to use a multi-phased approach, which is a prescribed response. So we have a known event, and then we have the unknown events or the unplanned events. So the idea is we have the plan, so we know what to do, and we're all working towards the same principles of keeping this individual safe and trying to reduce the escalation to avoid any restraint strategies that may need to be used or restrictive strategies that may need to be used. So throughout the process, the welfare of the individual is paramount, with a focus on minimising any physical intervention and ensuring the safety and dignity throughout. And by following these guidelines, hopefully you will be able to use this plan to manage their behaviours more effectively and to maintain their autonomy and dignity. So if we look at this plan that's on the page in front of you, you can see here we've got the date implemented and the review date. So again, it's important to review these so annually or after every instance. So if you're having lots of instances, what that would say to me is that the plan needs to be reviewed. At the top, we need to know who the plan's for, where they are, and the people involved. So here you can see up here, and ideally we want this to be a multidisciplinary approach. So it's not one person agreeing the strategies, but multiple people. So that could be family members, the individuals themselves, etc. We then have the personal details and then anything around their medical conditions, around disabilities or cognitive impairments. So when we think about medical conditions, why is that important here? Well, there may be things such as diabetes. So when we get this behavior, is it the diabetes that's causing the behavior? Or is it actually is it the medical condition or is it something else? So understanding that's really important. Furthermore, we may have a cognitive impairment or a phenotype. So there may be a precondition there that we need to be aware of, say, for example, dementia or another cognitive impairment. And that will help us then with the strategies moving throughout. So you can see on the first part, it says here, any information that would be useful to know, including information relating to trauma. And it's the trauma piece that's really important because trauma-informed care means that we've collected information regarding this individual's past experiences. And that trauma may be poor control and restraint. Maybe they've had poor experience with seclusion. Maybe they've been over-medicated in the past. So it would be understandable that those strategies could trigger some kind of PTSD response and post-traumatic stress disorder response. So understanding if somebody's been assaulted or grabbed, then we wouldn't want to use that same hold to cause a flashback. Equally, we need to know about the communication strategies. So, if you go back to your basic principles of care planning, what's their preferred method of communication? And again, knowing a little bit about their education or their skills ability gives the person that's managing this something to think about when talking to the individual. So, knowing something about that's really useful. It's important to know what's important to that individual. So again, if we have an understanding of what their likes are, we could use those in early strategies to keep this individual safe. So, for example, if I know that you like a red car, maybe I can just say, "Oh, hi, Bob. Oh, what's happening with that red car?" And that's enough to just focus the attention away. Furthermore, it's useful to know other things around their hobbies, cultural, or social needs. So, again, if what's important to them doesn't work, we can then look at their likes. Now, of course, it's important to know what their dislikes are, because if we dislike something, that in itself could become a slow or a fast trigger. And equally, it's things to avoid when in an escalated situation. So if I know saying the colour red causes you to flare up, then I would put that down as a dislike to inform other people to try and avoid that. So as we move on, we're going to look at understanding the behavior. So understanding the behavior looks at a range of target behaviors, and those target behaviors are just the things that you can see here. So you've got non-physical. So what's happening with them? What can we see that may tell us that they're about to escalate or something's going to happen? Um, their verbal aggression, what happens verbally? Do they start swearing? Does their voice start to escalate? Throwing objects, do they have a history of throwing things? The self-injury behavior, do they bite? Do they headbutt? Do they scratch? And then anything else that's useful for us to know. And then what we need to know from that is the targets. So kind of what could be some of those triggers? What could be some of the reasons for those type of behaviors? So if we have a little bit of information about what might trigger those, then we have a better understanding around the behavior altogether. We then move in to slow triggers. And slow triggers can be described as something that builds up over a period of time. So, for example, a slow trigger may be I've just got a really poor sleep hygiene. So I haven't slept well tonight, last night. I'm not probably going to sleep well tonight. So 3 days of not sleeping well. It's happening over a period of time. You could see that I'm getting more and more fatigued. You can see that I'm getting a bit more short tempered. So that becomes a slow trigger. And ultimately, for every slow trigger, you can then put a preventative strategy in there. So that preventative strategy may be the fact that you allow me to have a power nap during the day. It may be the fact that you remind me about some sleep hygienes, or indeed it may be the fact that there's some herbal remedies or something that can help me just to ease into a better night's sleep. So again, just things that we've agreed to help manage some of those slow onsets. But equally, we may have fast triggers, and fast triggers are those 0 to 100s. So things that happen really quickly, and then all of a sudden you are in a situation where you need to be proactive and use reactive strategies. So for this, you need to identify fast triggers that could provoke somebody. And again, if we think about mental health or illness, we may have something, say, for example, if you touch me on the shoulder and I've been abused, that touch may trigger a post traumatic stress response, which puts me into a flashback, which would make me scream and escalate. So I've gone from 0 to 100. So a protective and reactive strategy could be about de escalating me quickly. And they might be things such as grounding skills, breathing skills. And again, if you look on my YouTube channel, you will see lots of strategies on how to manage fast triggers. So from progressive muscle relaxation to there's about 10 different types of breathing to grounding skills, the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So lots of different sensory skills to help manage those fast triggers. So as we go through this, we then need to look at the risks. And those risks can be, again, from the behaviors that we saw up here. So the risks associated to these behaviors, the risks associated to the slows, and the risks associated to the fast. But what we need to do is we need to identify what those risks look like. So are they low risk of harm to self or others, or are they high risk to self of harm and others? And for each behavior, so let's say, for example, biting, you need to decide if that's low risk to high risk. Now, I highly recommend you use an evidence-based tool for this. There is a tool called the FIM score, which is the Functional Independence Measurement Tool. And in between that, it looks at the likelihood and the severity. So the likelihood of harm and the severity of harm, and it's on a table, and you bring those two together and it tells you whether it's high, medium or low risk. So ultimately, you're using evidence-based practices to come up with your risk rating. So behind all of this, and our very first intervention is going to be around positive behaviour support strategies. And positive behaviour support strategies really looks at identifying strategies that mitigate risk, but develop teaching the individual alternative behaviours or providing some sensory support to help self-regulate. And they would normally be written from your psychologist or from a behavioural analysis. However, there are lots of things that you can do to think about positive behaviour support. So there are courses that you can go on through Skills for Care. So there's free courses there. And equally in your training, you will have done a little bit about positive behaviour support. So just thinking about some of the things that you can do to highlight what's going well, look at their strengths, not recognizing on the negativity, and then identifying some of those strategies to help self-regulate. And self-regulation, again, could be things such as de-escalation, breathing skills, etc. And then finally, looking at physical intervention as a last resort. Now, you may never have to get to a physical intervention because there's never been any evidence of that harm to self or others. But if there is a risk of harm to self and others, then we should be prepared for some physical interventions. And those physical interventions can be from a low-level hand tap, a hand hold. When I mean tap, I don't mean a smack. I mean just a gentle tap on the hand, you know, come on, to a gentle guide, or to your top end of the restraints where you may have to do a secure hold. And people say, oh, that'll never happen. But the whole point of risk assessing, the whole point of this is not to have unplanned events, but to have strategies that you are confident and competent to use in case it does happen. So if the likelihood is there. So again, it will be risk assessed. You have had your training, you have access to all of the PDFs, and you have access to all of the strategies and on what to use those for. Good. So we move into then the 3 stages of escalation. And again, other models, you may see traffic lights. So we're going to use level 1, level 2, and level 3. And in level 1, we're looking at those very early stages of what causes an escalation and what the prescribed response could be. So for that, we need to be aware of signs and symptoms. So very early on, and if we think about ourselves when we get angry, we can generally feel our body tensing, our heart racing, our mouth becomes a bit dry. So the signs of adrenaline kicking in. So they could be early signs that something's not right. We may be clenching our fists or going a bit redder in the face. We may start shaking. So that would be level 1. And the signs are what you can see. So you may see the shaking, you may see the red face, but the symptoms is what they're going to tell you. So they may not be able to tell you, or they may just say, I'm angry. And that for them may be the sign. But again, what you can see, so signs and symptoms. And then for each of those signs and symptoms, we want to give a prescribed response. So let's just say in our first box, we go, I've got an increased heart rate. So then here, our prescribed response could be, you know, to sit down. Great. We're going to sit you down. If we slow you down, your heart rate's not going to increase, because if you're pacing, your heart rate's going to go faster. That's going to cause your breathing. So again, that could be the second one. So rapid breathing. And again, through your grounding skills, through your interventions, you might find, I don't know, the square breathing works, or the rainbow breathing, whatever the technique is, that's what it's going to be. Now, ultimately, you're going to list as many of those signs and symptoms there, and as many as the prescribed responses. And then at the end of that, I want you to assess what is the likelihood of, if I followed all of these responses, what is the likelihood that I can calm this person down and bring this episode to an end? Now, hopefully, you're going to be around the 80 mark, 80%, great. That does mean, though, that there's still 20% chance that it won't work, and therefore we're going to move to level 2. Now, level 2 starts to pick up a bit more. And when we look at the signs and symptoms of level 2, because the behavior has definitely started to escalate a bit more, we're going to be looking there at the verbal aggression, the physical aggression, the pacing, the defensive body language, etc. And in here, if you remember in your training on the PowerPoint and in the book, we say for level 2 interventions, you should use the de-escalation techniques. And the de-escalation technique was the acronym for, you know, the distraction, the active listening, and all those things. So again, just thinking about what you're going to do there. So hopefully, again, we're going to ask ourselves, what is the likelihood now of, we've done this de-escalation piece, we've done the distraction, we've done all of the positive behavior stuff, we've done all this. Are they likely to come to an end? And if they are, great, you can put that at 100, and we don't need to worry about a level 3 response, because what we're saying is we can manage this individual on level 1 and level 2 only. However, let's just say this person does have a history of going past that tipping point and maybe biting, kicking, scratching. And if you do, you're then looking at a level 3 response. So at the level 3 response, again, what does that look like? And here we can then look at some of the strategies in which we need to look at. And again, here, some of your prescribed response may be, you know, a proper planned distraction technique where you know that there's a favorite food or drink. It may be a physical comfort, such as a gentle touch. So again, that is, you know, if we're going to touch and hug people, we need to be sure that it's safe to do so. It may be offering that reassurance, validating their feelings, or using those redirection strategies, so moving them away from something. And ideally, we would want that to bring it to the end. So moving them now physically away from that situation. But let's say they don't want to move, and let's say it does still carry on. So at this point, we now need to think about the physical intervention techniques. And again, the physical intervention techniques there might be the low-level handhold, the low-level guide, or you may be going into a secure hold, or indeed you may be looking at a full restraint following this care plan. Now, from that, we now need to decide what is the likelihood that that brings it to an end. And ideally, we now need this to 100%. So these are the last strategies, because what we're saying is, well, look, we've tried everything else. We've done all the sitting down, the breathing, the reassurance, the kindness. We've used all of our de-escalation techniques. We've gone through those prescribed responses. We've done the positive behavior plan, but the risk is still there. And ultimately, we need to bring that to an end. And when we go back to our book, you'll see in the book, it shows you those levels of restrictive practices. And again, maybe you need to hold, or maybe there is a need for medication. So whatever that is, will that then bring it to an end? And what you tend to find is once you've done the secure hold and the medical intervention, that normally does bring it to an end. They go into, maybe they go that past that tipping point of neuroadrenaline, and they go into a sleep response, or maybe you end up in a seclusion situation where they're in a safe room to kind of they genuinely run out of steam and they de-escalate that way naturally. But ultimately, what we need to then do post-incident and then in the recovery phase is understand, what does that look like? So when they're angry, do they have big eyes? Do the eyes return back to normal? So this is the signs of the adrenaline and neuroadrenaline. What does that look like? I remember working with a gentleman who used to pace, and the faster he paced, the more angry he was. So we always knew when he was de-escalating, because the pacing would slow down or he would just sit and stop. So that would give us the recovery phase. Alternatively, he would ask for something to eat or drink, and we knew at that point that immense feeling had passed. But we need to then look at any post-incident strategies as well. So how we can support that individual afterwards. So thinking about how they're feeling, because they've just gone from 0 to 100. They've filled their body up with that adrenaline, that neuroadrenaline's kicked in. They may feel ashamed or upset or embarrassed about what they've said or done. They could be in signs of pain if there's an injury. So again, if we know that there's self-injuring behaviour, what does that look like, and how do we manage that post-incident? Finally, then, we're going to go to our reflective learning processes. So reflective learning is where we then come together and we look at the strategy. So what worked well and what didn't work so well? And what worked well, can we learn from that, and can we add a bit more to make it work even better? And what didn't work, can we either remove it or adjust it? So what can we do differently next time? So these plans are not designed to be fixed in stone. They are designed to be a reflective, ongoing tool to help you manage the technique safely. So on here, you'll see that there's a few notes for you to read, just about making sure that if you do a hold, that it is the approved technique that you are using, and that obviously the staff that are going to do that hold are trained to do it. And what I tend to do with those as well is show family members those holds, because actually once you've showed them, they're not that bad. They go, oh, it's really not as bad as I thought it was. The technique should not be applied on stairs. So again, just some bits and pieces there. So just about managing those techniques. And then again, thinking about those risks. So again, this is normally there for all of the people or individuals. We should always be thinking about checking their welfare, their well-being, and the ABCs. Are they breathing? Is their airway clear? And we've not restricted them where you can see we've cut off oxygen supplies, for example. And then finally, we've got our prescribed restrictive or physical interventions. So again, here, anything that we have decided to do up here at level 3. So at level 3, when we look at our prescribed responses after the escalation, what are we going to do? And you then have the images for each of those techniques. And what's really important for you to understand there then is for each technique that you use, that you understand that there